Today at the National Press Club, former tennis champion and commentator Jelena Dokic. Behind her awe-inspiring tennis career were the dark shadows of abuse. Her story of resilience inspiring many through her best-selling books. Jelena Dokic at the National Press Club.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's Westpac National Press Club address. My name is Emma MacDonald and I am the Canberra convener of Women in Media and the Associate Editor of Her Canberra. Today's speaker is former world number 4 tennis champion Jelena Dokic. Jelena meteorically rose in the tennis world as a teenager while suffering sustained physical, emotional and financial abuse at the hands of her father. But as the titles of her 2 best-selling books attest, she is both unbreakable and fearless. She's now a commentator, author and the subject of a #1 Australian box office feature film that's called Unbreakable. Before she begins, I would wish to advise that Jelena's speech will contain some sensitive topic areas around domestic violence, mental health crises, disordered eating and suicide, and to just be aware of that. If you would like to join the conversation online, please use the handle @PressClubAust or the hashtag is MPC. And at the final address of the year, I would just like to take a moment to thank the National Press Club for its continued support of women in media, and Morris and Lil and the whole team for continuing to amplify the voices of women. Now to the woman that we're all here to hear from today, Jelena Dokic.
Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to say it's an honour. This comes with great responsibility. So it's no surprise that my nerves are much bigger than playing on Rod Laver Arena night session, 15,000 people. But Melinda, thank you so much for the pestering of Morris to bring me here. Morris, I can't believe it took you that long. I didn't know that story. But I'll take it as a compliment and an honour that I'm the first tennis player since John Newcombe in 1983 to be here. That was the year I was born. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Just before I start as well, like I said, massive honour. Didn't sleep much last night. I've been prepping for this and I completely changed my keynote compared to what I usually do. And I'm only going to do half of what I usually do. The other half, let's hope there's a smart method to this madness. It's going to come from the heart. I didn't want to prep. So let's hope that it pays off for you and me. No pressure. Don't you dare say anything. Don't you dare say anything to anyone or I will kill you. Those were the words repeated to me pretty much daily by my father. I was taught, trained and raised to stay silent. In silence, darkness thrives. The power of child abuse, domestic violence, bullying, racism, mental health illnesses is our silence. I'm a former world number 4 tennis player, a Grand Slam singles semi-finalist, a Grand Slam doubles finalist, now a commentator, 2-time best-selling author, speaker, and with a #1 documentary out as well. But by far, my biggest accomplishment was finding my voice. Why? Because it literally saved my life. I would not be here today if I did not find my voice through sharing my story, through not being silenced, and through truth-telling. Today, I really try and use my voice to call out injustice, to advocate for change, but most importantly, to normalise the conversation around really important issues and remove the shame and stigma and change the perception around child abuse, domestic violence and mental health. This is a story of going from victim to survivor and even more importantly, thriver. But first, let me start at the beginning. My name's Jelena Dokic. I was born in war-torn Yugoslavia, the part and the country that is now Croatia. We didn't have very much growing up, but I remember I had some good memories with both my parents. In 1989, right after I turned 6, my father watched the French Open semi-final between 2 greats of the game, Monica Seles and Steffi Graf, who also became my role models. And the very next day, he showed up at home with this big tennis racket. and the rest is history. That was the beginning of my tennis journey. The very next day, I had my very first tennis lesson. I remember it like it was yesterday because that's how much I loved it. I remember hitting that very first ball. I loved aiming at targets. It was a very competitive and individual sport, which I loved. I was very energetic and competitive already as a kid. It was perfect sport. It was a perfect sport for me. But with that massive joy of playing tennis, something else came side by side, and that was abuse. The very first day that I had my very first tennis lesson, my father abused me physically. He slapped me around, pulled my hair, pulled my ears. It was a complete shock. I was in tears because this has never happened before. He never laid a hand on me before this. I had seen him get emotionally and verbally abusive towards my mother before, but up until now, he was never abusive towards me in any way. Something changed in that moment and that day, and in fact, things were never the same again. I continued playing. I had a really natural talent for the game. I started playing tournaments. I started winning tournaments. But my father's abuse only got worse. It was also made worse by the fact that he became an alcoholic. By the time I was 11, I was already hit with the leather belt constantly to the point of bleeding. I was kicked. I was punched. By the time I was 17, I had one of my worst beatings ever, where I was kicked and punched in the head so hard that it left me unconscious. There was also emotional, verbal, and financial abuse. I was already called the most insulting of names by the age of 9 and 10. And making the Wimbledon semi-finals as a teenager, as a 17-year-old, which was a massive breakthrough for me, emotionally, was one of the most heartbreaking moments I ever had. After reaching the semi-finals of Wimbledon, my father thought that was such a disgrace and an embarrassment that after my semi-final, I was not allowed to come back home to the hotel. I had to stay on the grounds of Wimbledon, hide, and find somewhere to sleep for the night. Outside of home and tennis, there was also some other hardship and adversity. I was a refugee twice. First time, when I was 8 years old, my brother was just 3 months old. When the war erupted in former Yugoslavia, we had to move out of Croatia into neighbouring Serbia overnight. We left with just 2 plastic bags. I saw my very first dead body when I was 8 years old as well, and my grandfather was killed in the war just a year later. When we arrived in Serbia, we were moved from family to family that would take in refugees. We lived in a rat-infested shed, no heating, limited water. We were lucky if we had bread to eat, but most days we went hungry. 3 years later, we were refugees again, and this time we landed in Australia, in Sydney. And I remember the day like it was yesterday. I absolutely loved Australia straight away. It really felt like home. But it did come with its challenges. It was a massive cultural shock. I didn't speak a word of English. I was bullied at school and the tennis community and told to go back where I came from constantly. But despite all of this, I had one thing. I had a massive, massive passion for the game, but also the ability to push forward, to be resilient, and I had so much passion for life. It took me to junior world number 1 at 15, Grand Slam singles semi-finalist at 17, Grand Slam doubles finalist at 18, and world number 4 at 19. But none of this was enough for my father. In fact, he was getting worse. He was unraveling. Some of his outbursts were now also public. It really affected my reputation. But worst of all was what was happening behind closed doors. And that was that his abuse was getting worse and more violent, and I didn't know whether I would survive the next beating. So I had no choice. And at the age of 19, during a tennis tournament at 2 o'clock in the morning, I escaped and ran for my life. I continued playing. I was still inside the top 10 and top 15 for the next couple of years, but things got really difficult. My father didn't leave me alone. He would still show up at tournaments. I had to hire around-the-clock security for years and years on the tour that no one knew about. All of this pressure, the build-up of trauma, all of the guilt and blame that my father was putting on me for breaking up the family and leaving home really started to take its toll. So much so that in 2005, at the age of 22, I almost committed suicide. I continued playing on and off from there for a couple of years, but I wasn't aware of it, that I was already struggling with anxiety, depression, PTSD, and even an eating disorder. Still had some good results, like my 2009 Australian Open run, but due to injuries and even more so my mental health struggles, I had to retire early from the game that I absolutely loved at the age of 29. It was heartbreaking, lost all of my identity, but I had no choice. At this point, I was there battling depression so deeply that I couldn't even get out of bed. I was locked in my house, my four walls, couldn't string two sentences together anymore, had no self-worth, couldn't look people in the eye, had no communication skills left. I continued to fight day by day, but I didn't know what was next. Not just what I was going to do next, but whether I was actually going to survive and ever even live a normal life ever again. And then something happened. About 2 years into my retirement, an offer landed on my manager's desk, and it was to write a book. And I remember I was really shocked and surprised by that, even more so with the fact that I always used to say I want to write a book maybe one day, but I always used to say it in a joking way and say maybe when I'm 50, 60, when I have more life experience. But the offer was here, and I remember my first instinct was yes, I really want to do this. But I was baffled by it because it was such a strong feeling that I really wanted to write the book. Today, I know that that feeling was that I just wanted to tell my story. But before I actually said yes, there was a couple of important questions I needed to answer to myself. And the first one was, why was I going to write a book? What was the point? I didn't want to just write a book for the sake of writing it or having something to do. There had to be a real meaning and purpose behind it. And I got my answer within 10 seconds. And that was that I just wanted to share my story to maybe help someone out there. I even say at the end of my first book, Unbreakable, that if it helps just one person in some way, it's mission accomplished. But there was also another question that I had to answer, and that was the fear of the shame, stigma, and judgment if I talked about all of the abuse that I went through and my mental health struggles, among many other things. Because let's be honest, there still is, but especially at that time, 7, 8 years ago, even more shame and stigma and judgment and a very different perception about child abuse, domestic violence, and mental health illnesses. But due to a few amazing people that were around me, they gave me the courage, they gave me the strength, they opened that door just a little bit, and you'll find out the importance of that a little bit later on, why that is massive, even to have that just from one person, because it allowed me to take that step and go into the journey. So 15 months later, 13th of November 2017, my first book, Unbreakable, came out. Yes, I know the exact date because that's how significant and important it is. I've said it every single day since, so just over 7 years now, that it is by far the best day of my life. Now, I don't say that lightly because even while I've had lows in my life and my career, I've also had incredible highs. But there was nothing like it. Why? Because this was freedom. This was a massive weight lifted off my shoulders. I found my voice. I reclaimed my life. I wasn't silenced anymore. I had no idea, actually, that would happen going into the process. And it did not happen until the morning of the book actually coming out. It was fascinating. And that was freedom. That was the beginning of my healing journey. But something else came with that. I was really amazed at the incredible support that I got from everyone, from the media, from the public, whether you were a tennis fan or not. Obviously, there was shock to everything that I talk about because I'm very open, I'm very honest and raw in my book, and some parts are difficult to read. But I felt like that needed to be told in full. If I was going to do it, I was going to do it 100%. I found that first step that I needed to start healing, but it was much more than that. I realized in that moment very quickly that it was not even about me. This was now about everyone else. This was now about how was I going to use my story to help others and to create some kind of change. While everyone was so incredibly supportive, there was something happening when Unbreakable came out. People were coming up to me, and even much more than at the height of my tennis career, which was shocking to me. But they would come up to me and say thank you. And I have to be honest, I had no idea what they were thanking me for. I didn't even ask the first couple of months. And then after a few months, I started asking people, but thank you for what? And I would hear different answers. Like, thank you for sharing your story and speaking up, normalising the conversation, especially around child abuse, domestic violence, mental health, bullying. There was different answers like, thank you for making me feel like I'm not alone and like I'm one of the rare ones. I thought I was. There was different answers even like, thank you for giving us a voice. Through you, we feel like we are heard and like we're not alone and you've got that platform. It was amazing to hear some of those answers. And that's where my why, what I do today, my purpose, and what I want to leave behind and what my legacy is really begins. It's the reason why I stand today. It's the reason why I'm alive today and why I do what I do. Going on from there, I still had to do a lot of healing myself, soul searching also. 6 years on, my second book, Fearless, has come out over a year ago, just over a year ago. And it's a bit of a different journey of hope, of having that belief that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's about finding your power to thrive, to go past hardship and adversity, to go past being victim, survivor, but that you can then be able to find that ability to thrive. But I also tackle very important issues like domestic violence, like mental health, like social media, like online abuse, trolling, body shaming. I talk about the power of speaking up, of telling the truth, of sharing our stories, and how it changes lives. My documentary, based on my life and my first book, Unbreakable, has just come out just over a month ago. More than 5 years in the making. We're number one. And it's incredible to have been able to see that also come alive on screen, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But all of these things point to one thing. It's how sharing our stories really has the power not to just save lives, but change our society for the better. And how can you find those ways to thrive? For me, there's been different things, and I even wrote them down. I had to find my self-worth, self-belief, confidence, practicing gratitude, and so on. I changed my speech a little bit for today because I'm going to cover some really important topics that don't even have anything to directly, maybe personally, do with just me, but our society and the way that we treat things. Now, the first two things that I want to cover, and they kind of go hand in hand, are shattering the myth of perfection and the power of vulnerability. Now, perfection actually doesn't exist. It's unattainable. You can strive to be the best version of yourself. You can strive for growth. You can strive for excellence, but perfection doesn't exist. And it is such a dangerous standard to set, and it is unattainable. It's what social media has done for a long time, what we saw in the media as well. We saw it in sport. We saw it in society. What is perfect anyway? And who decides what perfect is? I'll give you some examples. What's a perfect body size? What's a perfect height? What's a perfect athlete? What's a perfect career path? It's different for everyone. I like to say imperfectly perfect. I'll give you another example, a tennis example. You're going to love this one. Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic. Which one's perfect? They're all so amazing, aren't they? But all so different. Novak will go down as the greatest of all time with results, but they're all incredible, right? But can you pick one that's perfect? No. Maybe Novak's close. But even he'll tell you he's not perfect. But here's the thing. In sport and society, silence was golden. Always was. We're getting better, but it still is a little bit. If you ever talked about anything that resembled any kind of weakness, eating disorder, mental health struggles, abuse, you straight away felt like you were giving this edge away to your opponent. But even more so, you felt like you were not worthy, And like you were weak when it came to fans, media, sponsors. So everyone kept quiet. So many athletes suffered. They suffered during their career, they suffered after. But no one said anything. Nobody spoke up. Society was the same. So, not to be judged, not to be shamed, and not to be stigmatized, no one said anything. So people were here, athletes were here, society was here, suffering in silence. But what is here on the other end of the spectrum? It's deaths. And we hear about them all the time. We hear about them every day. And how many times have we said, had no idea, didn't see it coming, did I miss something? How could that have happened? I didn't see anything. Of course we didn't, because we are so good at suffering in silence. 9 Australians will take their lives every single day. That's just in Australia alone. 1 million people will take their lives every single year worldwide, and that's just what's reported. 1 woman is killed due to domestic violence now every 4 days. That used to be every 15 days. If that doesn't tell us that we need to have more open conversations, then I don't know what does. And that shame, stigma, and judgment needs to go. Where is the middle of the two ends of the spectrum? It's conversation. It's safe spaces and environments. But how do we get there? Well, we get there with vulnerability. Power of vulnerability. I even like to say that vulnerability is a superpower. We have been taught so often that vulnerability is a weakness, a massive weakness. But in fact, to be vulnerable takes so much guts and courage. Some of the most courageous people I know and some of the strongest people I know have an incredible ability to be vulnerable. Vulnerability leads to honesty, authenticity, to living your happiest, most joyous life and really being free. But what do you do when for decades or hundreds of years we've been taught that vulnerability is a weakness? That to be vulnerable is shameful. There was judgment around it. There was stigma around it. Vulnerability has allowed me to really be open about everything that I'm going through and get professional help for the very first time after 15 years. It saved my life. It gave me the ability to go on every single day and then recover and actually be here today. I know it's not for everyone, but there are so many people out there that actually do want to get mental health help. But they're afraid of being shamed and stigmatized. Because, let's be honest, even as far back as 5-6 years ago, if you talked about your mental health and if you talked about the fact that you wanted to see a professional, how many people would call us crazy? If you talked about child abuse and domestic violence, how many people would victim blame us? How many people would say that we're doing it for attention? How many people would say that we want pity and we want people to feel sorry for us? A lot, because that was the narrative. And again, people suffered. So it needs to change. We need to create safe spaces and environments for people to be able to be themselves, for people to be imperfectly perfect, for people to be vulnerable, because vulnerability saves lives. With vulnerability, we tell the truth, we share stories. Victims and survivor stories are our biggest lessons. Open conversations lead to change. There's been incredible people and there's been incredible women that have changed the world with their vulnerability, with that power to do it. And some even did it alone. Grace Tame was a huge inspiration of mine, and the other women together with her that have told their stories with such strength and such courage, horrific stories. It even changed a law. Athlete A documentary, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Simone Biles and the US gymnastics team and what that uncovered, the incredible amount of abuse over decades in the sporting world, and not even by parents, but by coaching staff. The Me Too movement, it was amazing to see the timing of that because it came out just a couple of months after my first book. It took one brave woman, and it uncovered, again, horrific details of so much that was going on behind the scenes, again, for decades. And even just recently, the French woman, Gisèle Pellicot, and how she, with such bravery, is going through and telling her story, making it public. And her words and her quote is, "I'm doing it for others, so that other victims and survivors of rape don't feel the blame, because we are not to blame and to shame. That needs to be put at the feet of abusers and perpetrators." And that's why we tell the truth, and that's why we speak up. I want to cover media and social media. It's been a massive part of my life, but also seeing it in sport, seeing it now outside of sport, being in so many different fields as well. For me, especially early on in my career, it was very tough to go through that period. My father's behaviour, which was very concerning, aggressive and drunk behaviour, was not called out. In fact, it was made fun of. It was all over the papers as a joke. There was no concern for 2 underage kids going home with this person. I was 15, 16. My brother was 8. He was 8 years younger. No one posed that question. When I would play players and you would do head-to-head with players, mine wasn't a head-to-head with my opponent. I wasn't even there. It was my opponent versus what they like to call the beast, which was my father. So if he was a beast, why didn't anyone have any concern and call out his concerning behaviour? My father forced me to switch allegiances from Australia to Yugoslavia when I was 17, just one day before my first round at the Australian Open, night session, Rod Laver Arena. It obviously caused a massive shock in the tennis world and in Australia. I was between 2 fires, whether I got home and I would survive the beating if I didn't do it, and then going knowingly into being hammered by sponsors, by media, by fans. But there was no question whether a teenager, an underage 17-year-old girl, actually had any control over this. Even after the booing of 15,000 people, whether there should have been more concern and more care. I was 16 when I arrived at my first Wimbledon as a qualifier. We didn't have very much, but we stayed at a 3-star motel, making the quarterfinals, where I stayed with my family, including my 8-year-old brother. It was called a brothel. No apology ever came. 2 underage kids. I never understood it. I never understood why. I left home at 19. I never had anything to do with my father again, but I could never separate myself from him. The media never gave me a chance. No one ever talked about me never having an incident. Just going out there playing, competing. Couldn't separate myself from him. Never given a chance. Social media, massive. I wasn't around when I started playing. It was when I was at the end of my career. I purposely wasn't on it at the end of my career, but went on it after I retired. Now, as I mentioned, I had a lot of judgment with the media, but I never knew that that would come with social media. So even as a commentator, being a speaker, and so on, even still being in the media, I didn't think that that much spotlight would even be put on me. Oh, was I wrong? The trolling, the online abuse, from literally comments telling me to go and take my own life, to being judged for being a size 20, but then if I'm a size 4, it's also not okay. Massive body shaming. And the power of vulnerability again saved me, because I called it out. I called it out. Media was incredibly supportive. Everyone was, again, whether you were a tennis fan or not. And I found so much power in that. But again, what I found was the power of words, of telling them, of speaking up. And how, again, sharing our stories and doing it publicly, especially if you have a platform, can transform things. I always stood with my head held high, whether I was a size 20 or a size 4. But I would have to admit that the online abuse and trolling made me question myself, made me a little bit go into my shell, and I've got a pretty thick skin. So imagine what it does for others. But I said, no, I'm not going to allow it. And what really stood out to me was that no matter what criticism we receive from media, or any kind of trolling or bullying or body shaming, anything online, I always heard things like, well, it comes with the territory. Or, you know what, maybe just it's better to go off it. Why is that the solution? I'm not out here doing anything wrong. I'm just going about my business. By the way, I use my social media to create a very supportive community, and I should go off that and accept it, or we should? No, I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to take that sitting down. Because again, that shame, stigma, and judgment needs to be put at those abusing. We need to change the whole conversation. Now, it's been very important to come into everything after I told my story and pretty much discovered for the first time who I am. It was really important to do a lot of soul searching, especially if I was going to help others, which was straight away what I wanted to do. I have a massive passion for it. But I had to also live in alignment with some of my core values, which were very important. And I really pride myself on them. But there is two that I will mention. And again, I think they have the power to change the world. Saying all of these things in my story was very important, but there's one thing I said to myself going into it 8 years ago. That was no hate, bitterness, resentment, only kindness and grace. I did it with my books, did it with my documentary, even do it through my commentary, speaking, everything that I do. People are shocked when I say that I don't hate my father. I don't hate him. I don't necessarily forgive him, and I haven't spoken to him in 10 years, but I accept it. He took something incredibly important from me, and I even have said recently with the release of my documentary, because I really cover it and discuss it in there, that I would take 100 years of abuse. I would take anything. Just for him not to have made me switch allegiances, especially that young, because I had no idea what I was doing, but I was afraid. He took from me the time with my country, with my people, with my home. Even when I came back a few years later, it was not the same. I was embraced, but it was not the same. Up until my books, my first book, but now the documentary, where people can really see the power of it on the screen. But I don't hate him. There is no hate, bitterness, or resentment towards the media, even the trolls. Because if I went that way, I would not be happy, and I'm not that person. I am not a hateful, bitter, or resentful person. But another thing that's even more important is that I cannot make any change, we cannot make any change, if we have that hate and resentment and bitterness. I could have easily been a very hateful person. But I wouldn't be able to help others if I was. You will never hear me go at media, social media, trolls. Even there, I'm trying to come from a place of kindness. And that is incredibly important. Kindness has the power to change the world. So I will never be hateful, resentful, or bitter, because this is, at the end of the day, about making a difference. I went through what I went through, but I survived, and I'm thriving today for a reason. I said earlier that I was fortunate that I got that opportunity to write a book. I was. It saved my life. But not everyone will have that opportunity. Not everyone will maybe have something that will save their life. So we need to be those ones that fight for others. And we do have the ability to do that. One last quick little thing. Belief, or believing in someone. Incredibly important. I didn't have a family, really. Didn't have supportive parents, nothing. I have felt extremely alone for a lot of my career, a lot of my life, where I had no one. And then there were parts of my life where I just had that one person. I'm a massive believer in resilience, in strength, in courage, and that we can do so much on our own. Even when you're maybe crying at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can get through it. But here's the difference. If we just have that one person in our life believing in us, we can move mountains. And I have felt that. And because of a couple of people, just a couple of people, but a couple of very important people, I am standing here today alive. And I tell this story because we all have the ability to do that. There was only a couple of people that gave me the ability to write my books. In fact, no one believed in it, only one publisher. Everyone else said no. Everyone said it's too sad. They said it's too hard to tell. Documentary was the same. Only a few people believed in it. That's why we're here today. There was only one or two people that believed in me reinventing myself, being a commentator, being on TV, being a speaker, writing books, maybe helping others. But that is all you need sometimes. You just need that door opened a little bit. And you just need that one person to believe in you. Why I say that, tell that story, is that you can be that for someone. I felt the power of it. There's nothing bigger and stronger than someone that makes you feel seen, heard, understood, accepted. I can't change the world alone. You can't change the world alone. We can't do it alone. But we can change someone's world, and together we can change the world one by one. So if there's one thing maybe you can do and have the ability to do, be kind to someone. You never know what anyone's going through, and believe in them. Really believe in them. I wouldn't be here today if a couple of those people didn't believe in me. 11 years ago, I was in bed without the ability to get up, deep in depression. I had no social skills left, couldn't string two sentences together, couldn't look people in the eye. Today I clearly can't shut up. And I'm known at Channel 9 as someone that can talk underwater, which is a good thing, trust me. Whenever there's a problem, don't worry, Jelena's got it covered. And I'm proud of that, because I could not string two sentences together 11 years ago, but belief of other people got me there. It really did. So believe in someone. You just never know. You might not just change their life, you might save their life. There's a reason both of my books are #1 bestsellers within a few months of coming out, every single time. Sold out book tours. There's a reason that an Australian-made documentary is #1 in cinemas for weeks and weeks, which is not usual. Sold out cinemas. I don't say this because of the standing ovations or because of sales numbers, no. I say it because there's a very, very important reason why. And what is that why? Well, that's because you can see that people really need these stories to help them, because people are struggling. I'm shocked at the support of the books and documentary. I really am. But it's the power of telling our story. It's the power of truth. It's the power of sharing our stories and sharing the hard stories. The best leaders and change makers in the world have an incredible power to listen, to communicate, to turn maybe the smallest of possibilities into something really, really positive. But also, they have the ability to inspire and empower. But you can't do that without telling the hard stories and then working to try and create change. I'm standing here, and I thought really hard going into my speaking career, how much of my story do I tell? And I'm someone that is very open and honest. But just for a second, I actually had to think about it. And then I asked myself the question, why do I need to think about it? Why do I maybe feel like I don't want to tell the whole story, or maybe just skim over it? And that's because for just 1 second, I thought about the shame, stigma, perception and judgment maybe of other people every time I speak in a room. And that's when I already found my voice. So I have decided that every single time I speak, write, whenever I can talk about my story and victims and survivors' stories, I will do it. And you know why? Because if I didn't do it, I would be turning my back to victims and survivors of anything from child abuse to domestic violence to sexual abuse to mental health, bullying, racism. I would be turning my back to them. We would be turning our backs to them. The stories need to be told. And also my 13-year-old self would not be proud of me if I had any shame. My 13-year-old self would only be proud of me if I told my story, especially knowing that it might help just one person out there. But while I have to tell my story, it's incredibly important. I want it to only be 20% of what you see today of who I am. I want that you see a person who has gone from victim to survivor, most importantly thriver. Someone that's a winner, someone that's a success story. Maybe someone out there, and maybe it's that other 13-year-old girl, will go, you know what, she did it, I can do it too. I want to set an example that I stood in the face of hardship and adversity. I stood in the face of fear, from my father to society to media, to come out and tell my story when it wasn't normal to. 8 years ago, almost 10 years ago. I want to leave a legacy behind, that I turned something bad into good, negative into positive, pain into power. And not even just for myself, but the ability to maybe help someone else. We need to create safe spaces and environments. We need to call out bad behaviour. We need to stop the shame, stigma and the judgment. And we need to really talk about the incredible power of vulnerability. On a personal note, I fought hard to be where I am today, to reinvent myself. And I got a lot of no's in life. I got a lot of no's when I started my commentary career, my TV career, speaking, everything. But I pushed forward. I didn't give up. I didn't give up when it was tough in life. I didn't give up when it was tough as a tennis player. I didn't give up in reinventing myself. I didn't give up in my mental health struggles. And I think it's an important lesson, because if I can do it, you can do it. Never give up on your goals and your dreams, but most importantly, on yourselves. If there's one thing I can leave behind, and this will be my final sentences, to my country, my people, my home, and my Australia. Please listen. Please learn and be open to the conversations. Please, let's not be silent about things. Let's create safe spaces and environments. Let's support people. Most importantly, the day that we stop talking about the most important issues in our society and we turn our backs to them, that's when our world and our society ends. So, if I could just leave you with one thing, sharing my story, telling the truth, not being silent and speaking up saved my life. It has done that for others as well. So, no shame, no judgment, no stigma, but also no silence, truth only, and be kind. Victim, survivor, thriver. Thank you.
Jelena, that was an incredible speech that shows resilience and courage that leaves us all in awe. I would also like you to know that Jelena had a tiny little note on that podium, so that was from the heart. And you can speak underwater beautifully. Oh. That was I don't see that very often. So before we take questions from the press, I just wanted to say that I feel the weight of complicity amongst the tennis community and amongst the media still rests heavily. Do you think if your story was playing out today, do you think it would be different?
Yes, I do, to be honest. I think that things have changed, and definitely in this country, which I'm proud of, and to be able to call Australia home where we are making a difference. But I always say that we can't get complacent. There's still more work to do. And that is why I really talk about this everywhere, about the not having that hate, resentment and bitterness. It's more about having the conversations, and it is more about standing here today 20 years later and asking that question, are things different? But even more importantly, maybe asking that question in another 20 years, have we come a lot further again? That's why I get asked all the time, did it go unnoticed, or did people know? Of course people knew, a lot of people knew, but that's not the point. The point is I'm here for a purpose. I'm here to tell a story, to try and make a change. And that's the most important thing, and I think it's extremely important to work on it together. Division only for me, it creates problems. So I think it's all about being united. I work with, and I'm friends with so many people that knew, or that even maybe wrote things at the time, and that's okay. Like, we've had those conversations, and today we kind of all work on the same thing and the same goal and the same purpose, which is to make a difference. So yeah, to answer your question, absolutely, I do think we've come a long way, whether it's sport, whether it's tennis, whether it's society, whether it's governing bodies, but there's still a lot more. There's still a lot more to be done.
You are incredibly gracious. Even to come and address the National Press Club after the run you've had with the press shows that grace. Our first question is from Carleen Minnie from the Canberra Times.
Hi, Jelena. Thank you so much. I want to be a little presumptuous at the start and apologise to you on behalf of Australia, the ignorant Australia that jeered and booed you when you were forced to make that horrible statement. And I really hope that you feel the full support and adoration from the country, not only as a great athlete, but as a great Australian athlete. My question is, you've mentioned how there was the unspoken knowledge of what was going on, or people at least had an inkling, and nothing was done till you got yourself out, and then people believed in you when you became older. If we were to have an inkling ourselves, and especially with a vulnerable young person, what's the right or wrong thing for us to do? What would have been the lifeline for 15-year-old Jelena?
Well, every case is different. That's the issue. Sport is different, but also outside of sport, it's very different. I always say that more questions need to be asked. You can't just scratch the surface. It's not enough. And often people don't realise that we are so afraid. But also, there's been many stories, and even in sport, where abuse has happened and we've managed to leave home. We've managed to escape. But we had no help once we did. So while it's just as dangerous while you're in the situation, it is just as dangerous when you leave, because you've still got that threat from that person. I had it. I had to have security for years and years around me, and I was afraid to be at tournaments or come out of my hotel room. And there's a lot of financial abuse that happens as well. So I think in general, mental health help wasn't available either. A lot of my trauma, for example, that I experienced, where a lot of my mental health struggles came from, was because of trauma, was because of abuse and being in that kind of family violence situation. So, look, there's a lot. I could talk about this for hours, but I think continuously asking questions and look, calling out that bad behaviour. You cannot have aggressive, abusive behaviour and not call it out. Once you don't call it out, it snowballs. And again, whether that's social media or certain comments that are put up, and there's just no space for that. It's a non-negotiable. So I think that that's why I said I do think we are better today, and that was my whole point. I just didn't want another person, another young person to have to go through the same thing, and that things are not different. There is no doubt that questions were not asked in my case. In fact, like I mentioned and gave examples, it was made fun of, which I never understood. To this day, I don't understand why you didn't see the concern and the aggression, and you got two young kids going home with that person, or was it just didn't matter? It was just about a headline. So that's why I talk about that so openly and passionately, and Same thing with social media, because we cannot allow certain comments like that, aggressive comments or bullying or any kind of abuse to go unnoticed. But I think it also stems from having these conversations. It stems also from, governing bodies, whether it's in sport or outside of it, doing their thing. It's not even just tennis or sport. It's about different fields. It's about different workplaces. It's about the culture that we promote and how people feel. Do they feel safe? I think that's really important.
Thank you. The next question is from Anna Henderson from SBS.
Thank you. Anna Henderson from SBS World News. Thank you so much for your address. I note in your online community, which is vast, you do have a lot of young people who communicate with you and who you're talking to. And so in that context, as a political correspondent, I just wanted to ask you if you have any thought about the fact that the Australian government is going to put a social media ban on young people under the age of 16, whether you think, given the abuse that you've suffered online, that is the right thing to do, or whether you have any thoughts about those online spaces where people have felt a sense of safety.
Yeah, look, I think it can't hurt. We don't know the results or the effects yet, but absolutely, the more that you lift the age, the better. I don't think it's. I think it's hard to keep kids away from social media, but I still don't think it's normal to have a 9 or 10-year-old on apps and social media. So, I think whatever we can do and test out, absolutely, because it's dangerous and kids are losing their lives because of it, because of online bullying. Again, one of the reasons why I felt like I wanted to call out, not just even body shaming me, because like I said, I've got pretty thick skin, but it doesn't mean I had to take it, but it was, again, more for other people. And you have no idea how many people, and even kids, even parents coming up to me saying, thank you for tackling that topic and putting it on the map. I do also a lot of talks with schools and the younger generation because of everything that they go through when it comes to social media. So look, it's a tough one. We've never faced this problem. My generation, even though I'm not that old, I don't think, but thinking that John Newcombe was here in 1983 when I was born, kind of making me feel like it. But we didn't have to worry about that. So I'm glad that Australia, we're the first in the world to put that in place, and even now other countries thinking to do it. To be honest with you, think it can only do good. I think if you put that ban and at least have it at 16, when kids are a little bit older, a little bit more mature. But you know what? It also comes down to education. I think at this point, we have to change, I think, as kind of the world changes and progresses. You got to have this as a subject in schools. You got to have this as a subject even in sport. You have media training. You now have well-being courses and training as well. This needs to be a part of it. Social media needs to be a part of it. I think that parents, to be honest with you, need to be more involved. I've heard so many parents say, oh, my kid would never do that. Do you really know what's going on? Not really. And some even say, or have told me, I didn't know my kid was actually on social media, some of these apps, because they do it when they go for a sleepover with their friends. So whether sometimes we don't know what they're doing and what they're exposed to, especially at schools, and I think we need to have those conversations. I don't think we can just leave it up to chance. I think it's up to everyone, parents, teachers, coaches, everyone in general, to have that conversation.
Next question is Shalila Medora from Triple J.
Thank you so much for your speech. I think we would all agree that as a society we are getting better at talking about domestic violence, but often that conversation centres around intimate partner violence. And as you so beautifully articulated, young people are often victimised by family members specifically and are very much left out of the conversation and are left out of the supports when it comes to what kind of support they can access. I'm hoping to get from you, as a survivor/thriver, of what supports might have helped you as someone who left an abusive situation and what you think governments and societies can do better.
There's a range of things. I think even financial support. For example, my father had control of my finances. Also, even what I kind of did have, I kind of, in the hope of being left alone, gave that as well. When I basically left home and escaped at 19, I was just lucky, to be honest with you, that I had the ability to get the next paycheck at the next tournament. Not everyone has that. And I still had to worry and really I was basically with my bags going to the next tournament with zero in my bank account. That was literally what it was. So financial support is a big one. You're often going to find especially with partner violence as well. That's a massive one, and women that I come across. Mental health help, massive, because it is such a massive trauma, any kind of abuse, and it's been proven that it causes the biggest trauma. A lot of addictions and even eating disorders, 90% are caused by violence and some kind of abuse or trauma, especially in childhood. So mental health help is massive, and I definitely think getting mental health help actually definitely saved my life. And I wish in a way that it was more talked about 10 years earlier, and that I knew that was an option, and that I didn't think that if I was going to do it, that I was crazy or some kind of person that needed all of this help that was not kind of normal, which it actually is. It's just as normal as getting, help physically. So I think for me, I would probably say those two, absolutely. I think we also need to be able to feel like if we escape, that we're safe. And I think a lot of women and a lot of, especially younger people don't feel that. From shelters, even in sport, whether you'll be taken care of. I escaped on my own. I know others that did. There's not really any care, or there wasn't any care, that if you did that someone would look after you. So you were a little bit on your own, maybe, your management, if you had management, which actually a lot of them don't, unless you're really good as well. So there's a lot of, I think, different aspects to it. But that, again, comes down to education. It's not just about escaping. It's not about just seeing. If someone is being abused, there's a massive part of it that comes with emotional, psychological and financial issues that need to be taken care of.
Next question is Tracy Holmes from the AFR. Freelance.
Yeah, from the Sports Ambassador podcast and the University of Canberra. Jelena, thank you. That was terrific.
Thank you.
My question is about elite sport and that business end of sport where you played and excelled as one of the world's best. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to have the machine that is elite sport where the pursuit is victory and winning and perfection, and I share your thoughts on Novak Djokovic on that, and still have an environment where these sorts of things are taken into account? Because I hear from athletes and also people that work in sport every week that continue to suffer in silence because there are ramifications if you do speak up. And so usually people don't until they're out of that machine, which leads to the second problem. Once they're spat out at the other end because they're not useful anymore, they don't know who they are because their entire lives have been geared to that one pursuit. Mm-hmm. So how does sport address that and fix that?
Well, it's about sport protecting athletes, not just when you're an athlete, but after it. And it's been a conversation definitely in tennis, even when it comes to now women becoming, for example, mothers. We get no, because you're kind of, your earning capacity is based on you playing. It's very, very difficult to earn a living at that time as well. It's about coming back even onto simple things like not even having a ranking if you go off and you have children. So this is like small things compared to what you're talking about. But yeah, absolutely, I think so. Look, I think it's definitely possible to play at the highest level, to be number one in the world, but also at the same time to have that incredible vulnerability, because it's actually a strength, and we've seen it actually from a couple of athletes now. And look, Novak at times has now been very open about things, and a few other players, and not even just in tennis but outside of it, and Simone Biles for being so open, really one of the first that she really gets so much value from talking to her psychologist, and that it's changed her life, and that she still does it, and she's normalised that conversation as well. Naomi Osaka also. So there's quite a few that have since come out, but only again in the last 5 years. If you said that 10 years ago, it would be a shock. You would be definitely judged. There's no doubt about that. So I think we are slowly making those strides. But I think that there is a space. There's no doubt for me that there's a space where you can be number one in the world, where you can be winning Grand Slams, or being top 5, top 10, doesn't matter, at the top of your sport, and you can still be open, you can still be honest, because we are actually, at the end of the day, because a sport like tennis, you have such a massive profile worldwide, you actually become role models for people. We become their voice. We become someone that actually speaks up for them as well. They see courage and inspiration and empowerment in us. So I actually think it's much needed. But I also think, when the sport part of it is done, so many of us are lost. A lot of people, but I don't think tennis is the only sport. There's a lot of sports where support is needed after. I never knew that tennis was I looked at it at the time, that's it, that's my whole life. What happens now? My life's over. When I actually realised that was only one part of my life, but I needed someone to tell me that. I was lucky that I had one person that told me that, but I think some of those, I don't even know what you would call it kind of well-being, maybe it is a well-being kind of courses or some kind of help where you actually help athletes and the direction that they want to go in, and even just help them mentally, because we live in such a bubble, especially tennis players, for example, to travel 11 months of the year, every week, different tournament, compete in front of thousands every single day. It's not normal. That's not normal life. And then you come back and the phone doesn't even ring, let alone seeing thousands of people every day and having to perform and having that adrenaline and that rush. So, absolutely. And I think, again, whether that's management, governing bodies, everyone has a part to play in the way that we look after athletes when they retire.
Thank you.
We have another freelancer, Catherine McGrath.
Jelena, thank you very much, Catherine McGrath. Thank you for your terrific speech. I want to shift slightly to your career now, because honestly, I paid tribute to your fantastic tennis career. Your writing skills, my goodness me, most people would be very happy to have one reasonably well-selling book. You've got the tennis career, 2 best-selling books.
Trust me, I didn't know I could write or speak.
Number 1 documentary. But here's the thing, a global, international broadcaster. Now, that's not easy. Can you reflect on that? Because, John Newcombe, the last tennis player to play here, to speak here, in the 80s and 90s, the male tennis players went on to these incredibly public careers in Australia. We were used to that. You are one of the very first women to break through at that level as a broadcaster and a global broadcaster. So what is it like to build that career? Is there enough global work around to do that all year round? Is it just Australian-based audience? I love your on-court interviews. They're fantastic, and that grace and kindness comes through. So congratulations, but please tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. I have to say, I actually don't like compliments, and that's why it's actually even very hard for me to be honest with you. To say maybe that I have a best-selling book, or I don't know. I just get a little bit weird and shy. But I'm very. I get a lot of people that come up to me with my commentary, and I hear the kindness part, which really makes me happy. I said going into it. And I actually had this conversation with Todd Woodbridge, and I said, you know what, Todd, everyone's different, but I want my commentary and my TV to be about kindness. I want it to be authentic. I want it to be honest. I want it to be raw. My interviews as well. There's a reason why I don't ask tennis questions. I go into other things and try and get players to feel comfortable and to open up, because I know they're going to now have to answer 20 of those in the media conferences. So little things like that. And it all really started, again, with me going into it and going, these are my core values. I wanted to do my commentary from the heart. I wanted to do it with kindness. Obviously, I really work on my craft as well. I can definitely say I wasn't a good commentator 6 years ago. There's no doubt about that. But I worked on it. And, I've pushed through. I can really say that I'm honoured to be exclusive with Channel 9 now for 6 years, and I was one of the, I think, probably the first one to go and put my hand up and go, you know what, if we're doing men's matches, can I try it? Can I commentate? Would you? I'm happy to do it. And they gave me that opportunity, and now I commentate men's matches, and I interview also men as well on court, which doesn't happen in every Grand Slam in every country, and it's only really started the last kind of 2 or 3 years. So I think maybe we kind of started that a bit and normalised it a little bit, and I'm very proud of that. So. I'm very proud when people say your commentary is great, but when I hear them say the kindness factor, and that they can feel like I do it from the heart, or that I have the passion for the sport or for the players, or to try and do something nice, that is like that's what I live for. That would also be my thing, that I would want to leave that legacy behind of going, you know what, she was a broadcaster, she was in this media world, it's not an easy world to be in, but she came, you know, with her own kind of idea, and I'm very, like, even when I go out to on-court interviews, I'm always smiling with the players. So for me, some of those things are so important for me, and yeah, clearly it comes across, which is great. It really makes me happy, and that's why I say kindness always. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question is Millie Morrow from Sydney Morning Herald and Age.
Hi, Jelena. Millie Morrow from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it really touched us all really deeply, and I appreciate you taking the questions. This one might be a bit of a switching of lanes, but I'm interested as someone who's excelled in the sport and someone who's been watching it for a long time. This year, some of our top-ranked tennis players tested positive to some banned substances, and seemingly without very sort of significant consequences in a situation which players like Nick Kyrgios have labelled as cooked. How confident are you and other tennis players in the anti-doping processes in place at the moment, and does anything need to be done differently?
How did I know a Nick Kyrgios question was going to come up? Very complicated question. I think that there are multiple answers to it. The process is very, I don't even know how to label it. I think the process is very complicated. I don't think it's very clear. I think that there's been a lot of spotlight, for example, on players that have really, truly, something has happened accidentally. But then there is no spotlight on actually why that happened and why there was contamination. Why is a company or whoever supplied and so on isn't bearing responsibility? Because there's now quite a few players that it really did get there accidentally. They didn't do anything wrong. And then it never could have known. So I think that, I think that there's a lot going on behind the scenes now. I think the process definitely needs to be quicker. And I don't know what to tell you, to be honest with you, from there, because I think it's a very unclear process. And I wish I could tell you something, but I think that, it takes a toll, especially on the players that really had no idea. But it's something that I think that we are only going to start the conversation now. I think it's going to be a massive conversation in the next couple of years because a lot is going on. I don't think the process is just very clear on how they're doing it. And I think every time something happens, there needs to be an explanation, and I don't think there is. And I think that there are a lot more people out there that need to bear responsibility for certain things other than players.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is Justina Basta from the ABC.
Hi, I'm Justina Basta from the ABC. Thank you for your incredibly powerful speech. Now, you mentioned that you experienced racism when you first came to Australia and you were told to go back to where you came from. Do you think that racism is still alive and well in Australia today? And what needs to change?
Look, I will always say Australia is my home. Australia is I will always be grateful. Australia gave me and my family an opportunity, gave us an opportunity we would not have otherwise. I would not have fulfilled a lot of those goals and dreams, not just as a tennis player, but today with where I am. And I am grateful for that. Would not have gotten that in many countries. So I love Australia, regardless of going through some of those experiences. I think they're isolated incidents. Are they still probably going to happen? Unfortunately, yes, and not just in Australia, but general in the world. But I don't look at Australia and I don't think that we are. And it is one of the reasons why I also talk about that and talk about that part, and that when it happens again, it needs to be called out. But absolutely not. I trust in this country. I love this country that's accepted me, and I've had incredible support. So have others as well. So, if you look at it as I think the whole thing, no, absolutely not.
Thank you.
And our final question is from Nick Stewart from Ability News.
Thank you very much for your speech. You mentioned grace in your speech. How do we bring grace into our national journalistic dialogue? You've been on both sides of the microphone. You've got to do it.
Oh, you sound like Todd. He sometimes tells me, don't sit on the fence. No, I think it's about the language that we use. I think, I think it's about the language that we use. I might see something on the court or something that happened. Obviously, I will call out abusive or bad behaviour, but I think you can, at the same time, with certain things, I think you have to have understanding. You will never hear me say anything bad about a player that's walked out and lost 6-love. Never. I will say, look, not their day. It really didn't work out. Got to look forward. Always something like that. I will never criticise, and that really I try to be. It's sometimes hard because you still have to put your, I think, kind of expertise out there on perhaps what went wrong. But I always say you can do it in a kind way. So I think as long as you have the empathy and compassion and think about what that person maybe is going through, then I think, I always say language. I think the way that you deliver it, but also the words that you use, and you picked up one word of grace, and that's what I try and do in commentary, or even when I'm speaking like this, and use those words like grace, like kindness, no hate, no bitterness, no resentment. It's so important. It's the way I live my life, but it's also the message that I send out. So, I think the language that we use, the way that we use it, the way that we kind of put the message out there can always be with kindness. Yeah.
That message of kindness is a lovely way to end the questions. You've made it through the Grand Slam of the National Press Club. Stay at the podium. We have a thank you gift, which is a membership to the Press Club. Again, an amazing speech, Jelena, and it's lovely to see. When we saw the footage of you as a teenager, you were so withdrawn and sad, and we look at your face today and we see it's cracked in a huge smile, so it's wonderful to see. So congratulations and thank you.